The coach left her at a depot that had been closed since the line moved south, and it left her there on a Thursday, in the first cold rain of the season, with a single carpet bag and a name that no longer belonged to anyone who wanted it. She was 25 years old. She had come west on a letter and a promise. 3 weeks of rail and stage and a kind of hope a careful woman lets herself feel only in small amounts, and the man who had written the letter was not on the platform. There was no platform, properly. There was a boarded ticket window, a sagging awning that let the rain through in 3 places, and a long stretch of wet road running out toward a town she could see in pieces past the grass. Adeline Crane set her bag down on the driest plank she could find and folded her hands over the front of her travel coat and did not, in the whole of it, let her chin drop. A woman learns young, in a foundling house, that the worst moments are the ones other people are watching for. So she stood the way she had taught herself to stand, and she waited to see what the country would do with her. The driver had said the name of the place twice, the way a man says a thing he is not proud to be leaving you in, and then he had turned the team and gone back the way he came, the wheels throwing up ribbons of mud. The letter in her coat said a house, a hearth, a steady man named Royce Tillman, who kept a freight business and wanted a wife who could keep a house and not complain of the quiet. The letter had been warm enough. It was the depot agent at the last town who had told her, not unkindly, that Tillman's freight business had folded a year back, and that Tillman himself had moved on, owing money to half the county, and that if a young woman had come all this way on his word, she had better have a second plan. She had not had a second plan. She had a bag and the coat, and a tin coffee pot wrapped in a shawl at the bottom of the bag, the one thing she had carried out of the foundling house when she left it, the one thing in the world that was hers. Across the road, past the grass, a man came out onto the porch of a low building that might once have been a stage stop and was now whatever a careful man could make of it. He was in his middle 30s, broad through the shoulder, a week of weather on his jaw, and he stood with a cup in his hand and watched the closed depot the way you watch a thing that is not your trouble until it plainly becomes so. He watched the coach go. He watched the woman not move. The rain came harder, and still she did not move. And after a while he set the cup down on the porch rail and came down the steps and crossed the road toward her, unhurried, his hat tipped against the wet. His name was Wesley Doran, and he had run the stop alone with his small daughter since the fever took his wife 2 winters back. And he had learned to read a person at distance the way other men read weather. He stopped a respectful way off and looked at the bag and the closed window and then at her. "The depot's been shut a year," he said. "Whoever you came to meet, he isn't here." He said it plainly, more a statement of the situation as it stood than anything meant to wound, and she answered him in the same key. "I'm beginning to understand that," she said. "I'd hoped to be wrong." He nodded slowly, as if that were a sensible thing to have hoped. "The rain runs cold off that ridge by dark," he said. "There's stew on the stove inside, and a back room with a cot and a stove of its own that nobody's using. You're welcome to both till you've sorted what comes next. No charge. I'm not asking anything by it." He said the last part the way a man says a thing he has already decided is right and sees no need to ornament. She looked at him for a long moment, taking his measure the way the country had been taking hers. Then she picked up her bag before he could reach for it. "I can keep a house," she said, "and I'm not afraid of work." He said that was good, because there was plenty of it, and he turned and led her in out of the rain. The stage stop was a long, low room with a plank table, a stone hearth at one end, and a kitchen behind a half wall where a pot sat steaming on an iron stove. A girl of perhaps 6 was kneeling on the bench with her chin on her folded arms. And when the door opened, she went still and watchful, the way a child goes still around a stranger who might not stay. "This is June," Wesley said. "June, this is Miss Crane. She'll be stopping a while." The girl said nothing. She looked at Adeline the way you look at weather coming, and Adeline, who had been a watchful child in a house full of watchful children, did not push at it. She only said hello, quietly, and let the girl decide what hello was worth. The back room was small and clean enough. There was a hook by the door, and Adeline hung her shawl on it and unwrapped the tin coffee pot and set it on the narrow shelf above the cot where she could see it. Then she took off her wet coat and rolled her sleeves and went to see about the stew. The first days she earned her keep without being asked to, which Wesley noted without comment. She found the dust the house had stopped noticing. She found the mending piled in a basket and gone gray. She found that the coffee had been boiled to tar every morning because a grieving man and a small girl do not tend to such things, and the second morning she rose before light and built up the stove and put her own tin pot on to boil and had real coffee waiting when Wesley came in from the cold with an armload of wood. He stopped in the doorway and looked at the pot and at her and did not say anything about it and drank 2 cups and went back out to the stock. She watched him through the window crossing the muddy yard and noted that he had set the empty cup back on the shelf rinsed, which most men did not do, and which said plenty. The girl was the harder country. June would not be coaxed, and Adeline did not try to coax her. She set a plate down in front of the child and did not hover over whether it was eaten. She left a length of blue ribbon on the bench one morning near where June kept her one rag doll and said nothing about it, and the ribbon was gone by noon, and the doll had a blue sash by supper, and neither of them remarked on it. On the 5th day it rained again, hard, and June stood at the window watching the road run like a creek, and Adeline came and stood near her, not too near, and said that her own mother, the only one she remembered, used to say that rain like that was the sky doing the wash. June did not answer. But the next time it rained the girl came and found her and stood near her at the window. And that was the answer. By the end of the 2nd week, the house had a different sound to it. There was bread cooling on the sill on baking days. There was a fire built before light, without anyone having to wake cold first. The loose board on the 3rd porch step, the one that had thrown a man's footing for a year, was quietly nailed flat one afternoon while Wesley was out with the freight wagon. And when he came in at dusk and crossed the porch and did not stumble, he stopped and looked back at the step and looked at the woman drying her hands at the half wall and said nothing, and that was its own kind of thanks. She kept his accounts straighter than he had. She doctored a teamster's split hand that came through on the southbound coach, cleaned it and stitched it neat and bound it before the man had finished deciding whether to be brave about it, and the teamster told it down the line. And after that the stage stop saw a little more custom than it had, men stopping who might have pushed on, because there was real coffee and a clean table and a woman who could close a wound without making more of it than it was. There was a night in the 3rd week that neither of them spoke of afterward, and both remembered. A family came through on the late southbound, a mother and a sick infant, and a father gray with worry, the child burning with a fever, asking only could they sit by a stove until the coach went on at dawn. Adeline took one look and said a child that hot did not travel. And she put the kettle on and sat up the whole night with the infant, sponging it cool, easing sugared water past its lips a drop at a time, doing the small, patient things that are all a person can do and that are not nothing. Wesley did not go to bed either. He kept the stoves fed and brought her dry cloths without being asked, and took June, who would not settle, onto his lap by the hearth. The fever broke gray toward morning, and the child slept, and Adeline sat with her hand on the small chest, feeling it rise and fall, and did not say anything triumphant about it. When the family went on 2 days later, the father tried to press coins on her, and she would not take them, and Wesley, watching from the doorway, learned a thing about her he had already half known. It was near the end of the 4th week that Wesley told her the rest of it, on the porch at dusk, with the last color leaving the pasture and the first hard frost a night or two off in the smell of the air. He had brought her a cup of the coffee she had made, which was a small reversal that neither of them named. "Where'd you learn to keep a house this well?" he asked, with nobody to keep it for. She held the cup and looked out at the dark coming down off the ridge. "I was raised in a foundling house," she said. 40 children and 3 women to mind them. You learn to be useful early, or you learn to be invisible, and I was never any good at invisible." He took that in the way he took everything, slowly, without flinching from it. "The man who sent for me," she said. "Tillman, I think I knew before I came that a man who'd take a wife by post was a man other women had already had the sense to refuse. I came anyway. I had no other road." She said it without self-pity, more a statement of the situation as it stood. Wesley turned his cup in his hands. "June asked me yesterday if you were going to stay," he said. "I told her that wasn't mine to answer." He left it there. He did not ornament it. They sat in the cold until full dark, and neither of them said the larger thing, and in not saying of it was warm as any fire. The town was 2 miles out, and the town had been watching. It always was. A woman named Hortense Pike kept the dry goods counter, and a long memory and a voice built for carrying, and when Adeline came in on a Saturday for flour and thread, Hortense let the whole store hear her wonder aloud how it looked. A young, unmarried woman living out at the Doran place with a widowed man and no ring and no kin to speak for her. She said it the way some people say a thing they have been saving up. She said she only mentioned it out of Christian concern. She said a woman who'd come west to marry one man and ended up under another man's roof was a particular kind of woman, and there was a word for it, and the word was not a kind one. A few people laughed, not all of them, but enough. Adeline set her coins on the counter and counted her change and did not raise her voice. "I came west to marry a man who lied in his letters and then ran from his debts," she said evenly to the room. "I was left at a closed depot in the rain. A decent man gave me a dry roof and asked nothing for it, and I have earned every meal under it. You may make of that what you like." Then she gathered her parcels and walked out with her chin level. And behind her the store was quieter than Hortense had meant it to be. But talk, once started, runs downhill on its own, and the warmth that had been building out at the stage stop pulled back a little, the way water draws back from a shore before a frost. June heard a version of it from another child and came home with a face full of questions she did not know how to ask. Wesley heard the longer version of it from a teamster who thought he was doing him a kindness. And then the talk stopped being the worst of it, because on the second day of true frost a man rode up the road to the stage stop on a livery horse, in a coat too fine for the country and boots that had not done a day's work, and Adeline knew him before he reached the porch by the set of his shoulders and the way he came, like a man arriving to collect. It was Royce Tillman. He had heard, the way men like him always hear, that the woman he had sent for had not drifted off and died as he had half assumed, but had landed somewhere with a roof over her and a man who fed her, and that had made her suddenly worth the ride. He came up onto the porch as if it were his, and smiled at her as if the depot and the rain had been somebody else's doing, and said her name like a thing he owned. Adeline, there you are. He said he had run into difficulties, that the freight business had been a temporary setback, that a man could not be blamed for the cruelty of markets. He said he had come to collect his bride and make good on his promises, that she had crossed a country on his word, and that bound her, and that any decent woman would honor the arrangement she'd traveled west to keep. He said it loud enough for the open door to carry it inside, where June had gone still on the bench. Then he set a hand on the carpet bag by the door as though to begin the leaving, and said the freight of bringing her west had cost him, and that there were debts between them now, and that he meant to have what was owed one way or another. Wesley came around the corner of the house then, unhurried, wiping his hands on a rag, and stepped up onto his own porch and put himself between the man and the door without any show of doing it. He looked at Tillman's fine coat and idle boots a moment. Then he went inside, and they heard a drawer, and he came back out with a worn leather wallet and a tin box. And he counted out onto the porch rail every coin and folded note he had, the money he had been setting aside for 2 years to buy the freight contract that would let him stop running a stop and start running a life, the dream he had never once spoken of aloud. He counted it all out in the cold in front of the man and the woman and the watching frost. There's what it cost to bring her west, he said, and more the fare twice over. He set it on the rail. That settles the fare, the fee, and every excuse you rode in with, he said. It does not buy her. There's no buying her. It frees her from any claim you think you carry. Now take it and go, and don't come up this road again. He did not raise his voice. He said it the way a man says a thing he has already decided is right and sees no need to ornament. Tillman looked at the money, and at the size of the man, and at the woman standing straight in the doorway with the child's hand suddenly tucked into her skirts, and whatever he had ridden up meaning to do, he found he was not the man to do it. He took the money, a man like that always takes the money, and had a few words left about ingratitude, about how she'd regret throwing in with a man who ran a roadside stop, and Wesley let him have the words because they cost nothing. Then Tillman turned the livery horse and went back down the road, smaller with every length of it, and the frost closed over the sound of the hooves. And that was the end of him. Adeline stood in the doorway a while after he was gone, aware of what the man had spent, and of what he had spent it for, and of the fact that he had not looked at her once while he did it, the way a man does a thing, because it is right, and not because he wants thanks for it. That night, after June was asleep, with the blue sash doll under her arm, Wesley and Adeline sat at the plank table with the lamp between them, and for a long while neither of them filled the quiet. The frost made the timbers tick as they cooled. Finally he turned his coffee cup a half turn on the wood, the way he did when he had decided a thing and was working up to the plain saying of it. "That was my freight money," he said. "I want you to know that so you don't hear it from the town. I'd been saving it a long time." She said she knew what it was. She said she'd seen the tin box on the high shelf and known a man only keeps a thing up that high when it's the thing he's living toward. He nodded. "I don't regret it," he said. It brought back something worth more. He looked at the lamp and not at her, in the way of a man saying the hard, plain thing. "June calls your name in her sleep now," he said. "The house runs warm. I built that step you mended 12 times and never got it right, and you fixed it in an afternoon and never said a word." He stopped. Then he said it. "I'd like you to stay," he said, "as my wife, if that's what you want. I'll not ask it twice, and I'll not ask it of you to be grateful. Only to stay, because this is where you belong, if you'll have it." She let the silence sit. She had spent her whole life having other people decide what she was worth, and she would not be hurried now even toward a thing she wanted, because the wanting of it was hers, and she meant to choose it as a free woman and not a rescued one. The lamp burned. Outside, the frost held the whole country still. She thought of the closed depot and the rain and the long road, and of the morning coffee and the nailed step and a man counting out his only dream on a porch rail and not once looking up for thanks. Then she reached across the table and set her hand over his plain, the first time either of them had crossed that small distance. "Yes," she said, "that's what I want." He turned his hand under hers so they were palm to palm, and that was all, and it was enough, and the lamp burned down low while the two of them sat in the warm and did not need to say one more word. They were married before the snow came, in the front room of the stage stop, with a circuit preacher who'd stopped for coffee and stayed for a wedding, and June in a clean pinafore holding the blue sash doll. Even Hortense Pike sent a jar of preserves down the road with a teamster, which was as close as a woman like that comes to an apology, and Adeline accepted it without making more of it than it was. The freight contract Wesley had meant to buy went to another man, and Wesley did not seem to grieve it. He kept the stop. The stop kept them. The dream he had spent turned out to have been a smaller thing than the one he got in its place. The seasons turned the way they do. Spring came up green along the road that had once run like a creek in the rain, and June grew and called her mama without thinking about it one ordinary morning over the porridge, and Adeline went still over the stove for just a moment and then went on stirring. And Wesley, at the table, noted it without comment, and the three of them ate breakfast in the warm light as though it had always been so. On the narrow shelf above what had been the back room cot and was now a proper bedroom, and then on the kitchen shelf where the morning sun found it, the tin coffee pot sat in its place, the one thing she had carried out of the foundling house, the one thing in the world that had been hers when she had nothing else, and now it sat in a house full of things that were hers. In the early light, steam rising off it on a cold morning, a small, dignified shine in a warm room. And that was the story of Adeline, a woman who was left at a closed depot in the cold rain with a bag and a spine and a battered tin coffee pot, and who walked into a stranger's warm kitchen and stayed to make it her own, and ended with everything that actually matters. Tell me in the comments if you enjoyed this one. Thank you.